Welcome to Drug-Free Workplace PA's Medical Marijuana in the Workplace presentation. Before we get started, I'd like to point out that Drug-Free Workplace PA recognizes the controversy. Medical marijuana is a highly debated national issue, and this presentation is for educational purposes only. It should in no way be construed as an opinion for or against the legalization of marijuana from Drug-Free Workplace PA. Our primary goal is to provide you with the facts and information as readily as it becomes available. In today's education, we're going to look at what is marijuana, medical marijuana in Pennsylvania, medical marijuana in the workplace, what employers need to know, and resources. What is marijuana? Marijuana is a depressant, stimulant, and hallucinogen. It's a greenish-gray mixture of dried flowers of cannabis sativa. Medical marijuana is currently legal in 33 states, including Pennsylvania. Recreational marijuana is legal in 12 states and DC, not including PA. It is a Schedule I controlled substance under federal law and is considered under federal law to have no medicinal value. For the purpose of this presentation, we're going to focus on the THC portion of Pennsylvania's medical marijuana law. THC is the cannabinoid in marijuana that is the most psychoactive and the portion that produces a high. It is legal in Pennsylvania with a doctor's recommendation, and we say recommendation because medical marijuana cannot be prescribed. In order for something to be prescribed, it needs to be FDA approved, and somebody would be given a prescription and they would pick that prescription up at their pharmacy. Because it is illegal under federal law, it cannot be FDA approved, and therefore it would be recommended by a doctor. And that's why somebody would go to a dispensary to pick up their medication. Marijuana affects many different areas of the brain and the way that our body functions. Different areas that are affected control the way that we think and remember things, and our appetite and our body regulations, such as blood pressure and breathing and heartbeat. Different side effects from marijuana include altered senses and altered sense of time, changes in mood, impaired coordination, difficulty with problem solving and critical thinking, impaired memory. And when taken in high doses, it could also have side effects that include hallucinations, delusions, and psychosis. Medical marijuana in Pennsylvania. You can see on this map that Pennsylvania is the lighter green state. The lighter green states are states that currently have medical marijuana available, and the darker green states are the states that have recreational marijuana available. New Jersey became the 12th state in November of 2020 to allow for adult use recreational marijuana. And it is still showing light green on this map because that law has not gone into effect as of November 2020. It was just recently voted into law. Oftentimes we're asked, how is it that medical marijuana can be legal in the state, but it's federally illegal? And the bottom line is that federal governments can't force states to criminalize conduct that is illegal under federal law, nor can the federal government force state and local police to enforce federal laws. In all 33 states that have authorized the use of medical marijuana, there are no known cases of the federal government prosecuting an individual for a small amount of marijuana. And what is medical marijuana? We hear all different words when we hear about marijuana or cannabis. So medical marijuana in Pennsylvania is a form of the cannabis plant that contains well over 100 active cannabinoids, including THC, And again, THC is the most psychoactive component of the cannabis sativa plant. There's also hemp. Hemp was made legal with the Farm Bill of 2018. It as a U.S. In the U.S. as an agricultural product. It is used to make clothing, supplements, food, and other products. And that's grown right here legally in Pennsylvania. But hemp is only about 0.3% THC and would not cause somebody to have any psychoactive effects, nor would it cause somebody to come up positive in a drug testing screen compared to marijuana, which has, 20% or higher THC content. And then there's also CBD, and that is another cannabinoid, but unlike THC, CBD is not psychoactive. And again, CBD would not cause somebody to fail a drug screening within the workplace. CBD can be purchased legally in Pennsylvania at health food stores, gas stations. You see it in many, many stores it's available. Medical marijuana is a physician-recommended legal medication for the treatment of a serious medical condition, and any Pennsylvania resident who wishes to use THC-based marijuana must possess a valid medical marijuana card. And any resident that has that valid medical marijuana card would then purchase their marijuana at a licensed dispensary. They would not be able to purchase it off the street recreationally. That would not be a valid legal way to use the medical marijuana card. There are two different types of cards that are available in Pennsylvania, a caregiver card and a patient card. And this is what a sample of what these cards would look like. A patient card would be what somebody in the workplace would potentially show you if they were a medical marijuana patient, if they chose to give you that information. Their card would say patient on it. The other card is caregiver. A caregiver can have up to 5 patients that they are picking up product for and delivering it to them. It may be somebody under the age of 18, it may be somebody that's homebound. But if somebody has a caregiver card, that is not a card that can be used to ingest medical marijuana. So if you have an employee that is on the medical marijuana program, they would be showing you the patient card. Pennsylvania Act 16 defines 23 serious medical conditions as qualifying conditions for the use of medical marijuana. And we'll go through those 23 conditions. They can include autism, cancer, epilepsy, glaucoma, inflammatory bowel disease, epilepsy, anxiety, opioid use disorder, Parkinson's disease, sickle cell anemia are the qualifying health conditions. And forms of medical marijuana that are available within Pennsylvania include all forms except for edibles. And those were oil, pill, tincture, topical forms, liquid, and dry leaf or bud. Dry leaf can be used for vaporization or nebulization. It is not to be smoked as a joint or blunt or in a bong or anything like that. It has to be either vaporized or nebulized. Pennsylvania's medical marijuana program is broken down into 6 different regions, just to give you an idea of dispensaries that may be in your region or near your place of employment. Each region has a certain number of grower processor permits, and each region is allowed to have a certain number of dispensary permits. Each dispensary is allowed to have 3 different storefronts. So if you look at region 1 in Southeast Pennsylvania, they are allowed 2 grower processor permits and 10 dispensary permits. So across the southeast region of Pennsylvania, once the medical marijuana program is fully operational and completed with all phases, there will be 30 medical marijuana dispensaries within that region, or up to 30. And to give you an idea of what your employee would do to get a medical marijuana card, how exactly that works. First, the patient would register online with the medical marijuana program, and they would choose which of the 23 qualifying health conditions that they do have. They would pick up their medical records from their physician, and they would bring their medical records to a physician that's certified to recommend medical marijuana. If that physician does agree that this may be a suitable treatment option for this person, they would go online and let the Department of Health know. The patient would just go online then and pay a $50 fee to have their medical marijuana card, and that card would be mailed to them within a couple of weeks, and then they would visit a dispensary in Pennsylvania to obtain their medical marijuana. And again, they would have to visit a dispensary in Pennsylvania and purchase that marijuana legally and not off of the streets recreationally. And how does medical marijuana affect the workplace? We're going to take a look at Pennsylvania Act 16 and what the laws are in place for the workplace. So a patient may not operate or be in control of any of the following while under the influence of a blood content of more than 10 nanograms of active THC per milliliter of blood in serum. And this lists two types of positions: chemicals which require a government permit, and high voltage electricity or any other public utility. And if you look at the wording again, it says while under the influence. And for these particular positions, it identifies 10 nanograms of active THC per milliliter of blood in serum as a definer of under the influence. And again, that is only for these specific positions. If you look at the next section of the law, it says that a patient may not perform any employment duties at heights or in confined spaces, included but not limited to mining while under the influence of medical marijuana. Again, the wording here says while under the influence of. It does not specify that an employer or an employee rather could have a card, a medical marijuana card or not. It just says they can't be under the influence in work. As I'll point out throughout this presentation, it's really important to have a reasonable suspicion policy in place if you do suspect that somebody may be under the influence of medical marijuana or any substance within the workplace. What types of prohibitions are allowed for employers? A patient may be prohibited by an employer from performing any task which the employer deems life-threatening to either the employee or any of the employees of the employer, again, while under the influence of medical marijuana. A patient may be prohibited by an employer from performing any duty which could result in a public health or safety risk while under the influence of medical marijuana. This prohibition shall not be deemed an adverse employment decision, even if the prohibition results in financial harm for the patient. And what types of protections are there for employees that are spelled out in Pennsylvania Act 16? Pennsylvania does have an anti-discrimination clause, which states that no employer may discharge, threaten, refuse to hire, or otherwise discriminate or retaliate against an employee solely on the basis of that employee's status as an individual who is certified to use medical marijuana. So the anti-discrimination clause set forth in Pennsylvania Act 16 has basically made every employer or every employee that has a medical marijuana card a protected class. Nothing in this act shall require an employer to make any accommodation of the use of medical marijuana on the property or premises of any place of employment. So the law is pretty clear here that you cannot discharge, threaten, refuse to hire an employee, but you also do not have to accommodate the use of medical marijuana on the property. And what protections are there for employers then? So this act shall in no way limit an employer's ability to discipline an employee for being under the influence of medical marijuana in the workplace. And if you're showing that somebody is under the influence of medical marijuana in the workplace, you are going to want to show that the employee's conduct fell below the standard of care and that they were under the influence of marijuana in the workplace. And again, reasonable suspicion, having documented reasonable suspicion paperwork would be the best way for you to be able to show this. If anybody listening in is interested in learning more about reasonable suspicion process, please reach out to us or tune into our supervisor reasonable suspicion education. And we talk a lot about under the influence, right? Because the law's not saying that these employees can't have a medical marijuana card, but it's saying that we don't have to allow somebody to be in the workplace under the influence, and that we don't have to allow people to perform certain tasks while they're under the influence. So what exactly is under the influence? Under the influence is when we're seeing a diminished capacity, signs, emotional, behavioral, or physical signs that somebody is under the influence. It could potentially affect the safety of themselves or anybody around them. It's a condition of being unable to perform a task as a consequence of a substance and showing those signs and symptoms of impairment. And again, this is reasonable suspicion will help you to identify this. Employer protections. Nothing in this act shall require an employer to commit any act that would put the employer or any person acting on its behalf in violation of federal law. So some examples are, we know that employers that are covered by the Omnibus Drug Testing Act of 1991 are excluded from following the Medical Marijuana Act 16, and all federal employers, anybody that is a federal employee, would not be able to partake in the medical marijuana program. And different examples of Omnibus Drug Testing Act of 1991, what employers are covered there. We would have the Federal Aviation Administration, Federal Transit Administration, National Highway Traffic Safety Administration, United States Coast Guard, Safety Sensitive Industries, Department of Defense, Nuclear Regulatory Commission, and Department of Transportation. Federal regulations do not recognize the use of medical marijuana as a valid reason for a positive. And different safety sensitive positions, right? There's so many other safety sensitive positions that aren't mentioned, maybe a machine operator or somebody cutting vegetables in a kitchen with, a sharp knife really fast, or things like that. So there's tons of safety sensitive positions that are not mentioned in the medical marijuana laws. And unfortunately, Pennsylvania courts are going to be deciding what that looks like for employers. And until that happens, it leaves many employers in a gray area. So there's some certain things that employers can do, which we'll look at in a few minutes here. But safety sensitive positions, what exactly is a safety sensitive position? It's important to know that if you're labeling a position as safety sensitive, that the burden of proof would fall on the employer to demonstrate that the employee's inability or impaired ability to perform job duties that would result in a direct threat to themselves or others, you would bear that burden of proof. So we can't just simply label jobs as safety sensitive, but we can go through back to all of our job descriptions and look and see if there are positions that maybe can be labeled safety sensitive, even if something is only 5% safety sensitive. We want to make sure that we're showing that within somebody's job description. And to learn more about safety sensitive positions, you can visit OSHA.gov and SAMHSA.gov are both great resources to learn about safety sensitive positions and different ways that employers can protect their businesses. Again, those job descriptions, if we have outdated or inaccurate job descriptions, they're not going to help an employer's efforts to establish that an employee's conduct fell below the expected standard of care. Drug and alcohol policies. It's important to review current or create new drug and alcohol policies, create written substance misuse policies that spell out your rules, expectations, and consequences if there is a issue where somebody is using a substance in the workplace. If you are aware that somebody does have a medical marijuana card, you are going to want to clearly state to them that medical marijuana use while working is not acceptable. You want to have a process in place to review reasonable accommodation requests for medical marijuana card holders. You could update equal employment opportunity policies to include potential employees who are medical marijuana card holders. You want to make sure that you have a policy securely in place for handling those workplace violations and educate employees on policies by providing updated policies using a signature acknowledgement form, whether it be an online signature or in-person signature. You want to make sure that you are getting some type of acknowledgement back. Simply handing an employee a new policy or an updated policy, will not give you proof that you did give that policy out. If you're an employer that currently does not have a drug or alcohol policy, our webpage, drugfreeworkplacepa.org or dfwpa.org, we do have a free drug and alcohol policy builder available on our webpage. And in about 20 minutes, you can have a fully created drug and alcohol policy with your logo on it. If you are creating a new policy, we do recommend that you allow 30 days before that new policy taking place or going into place. Things to remember about stigma. When you're creating your policies, you want to make sure that you're using non-judgmental terminology, and you want to inform supervisors that anybody that does have a medical marijuana card, and this really should be across the board with any issue, right, that we're using proper, terminology, we're not bullying people, and we're keeping that person's information confidential. And employment applicants, the law did state that, we can't not hire somebody only based on the fact that they have a medical marijuana card. So we don't want to ask employment applicants or employees if they're certified to use medical marijuana. It is a protected demographic, just like age, disability, and religion. We can have a self-disclosure policy in place, but that self-disclosure policy should not be exclusive to marijuana. You would want to include any type of mind-altering substance, whether it be a prescription from a doctor for an opioid or a benzo or a cold medication purchased over the counter, allergy meds, anything that could alter somebody's mind and affect the way that they are working. So we could have a self-disclosure policy for anything across the board. And it's really important to remember, as employers, oftentimes we hear from employers, it's new, it's scary territory, but really just take a step back. and do exactly what you would do if you had an employee that came to you and said, hey, I fell over the weekend and I broke my leg and I was given an opioid pain pill, or my anxiety has been really high and my doctor, gave me a prescription for a benzodiazepine. What is the policy that you have in place for somebody that would come to you with that information? And you would want to really just take a step back and do the same exact thing if somebody came to you and had, disclosed to you that they did have a medical marijuana card. And again, regular guidelines regarding an employer's requirement to accommodate do apply. An employer must exercise due diligence regarding health and safety laws while accommodating an employee. And accommodations could be something as simple as only using marijuana with, the evening before from after work until bedtime, or, it might require moving that employee to a different position. It's going to depend based upon your workplace and what that employee's position is. And if you have a laboratory, it's really important to have a conversation with the lab. You can bring in the medical review officer or MRO if somebody does have a medical marijuana card, and they could get involved. They could reach out to their diagnosing doctor for the disability. They could reach out to the recommending doctor for medical marijuana and help you to set guidelines for that employee. You want to have a process in place for gathering medical information to facilitate those accommodations. And again, talking to your lab would be a great place to start. Identify restrictions on the use of medical marijuana in the workplace, highlight breach of policy and consequences, advise employees and job candidates that medical clearances will be required before a safety-sensitive job can be considered. It's important to know that courts are increasingly ruling that federal laws do not preempt the anti-discrimination provisions of state marijuana laws. While no court cases have currently been decided in Pennsylvania, there is currently litigation going on that will help to answer some of our questions for employers and set course and guidelines for employers. So employers should not rely on federal laws or their status as a federal contractor to not adhere to Pennsylvania Act 16 regulations. We do encourage you, if you are having questions, that in regards to federal laws, or if you're a federal contractor, we do encourage you to speak with your employment attorney for more information. Supervisory discipline. If you are disciplining somebody that does have a medical marijuana card, you're going to want to remember that you're showing that that employee is functioning below the standard of care or expectation for their specific position. And it's important to know that drug testing does not measure current impairment. If we send an employee out for a drug test, that test is really going to tell us, hey, this person used marijuana at some point within the last, 30 days, or maybe even more, depending on the type of test that you do. It's not going to tell us that somebody used marijuana at 8 o'clock this morning on their way into work or at noon on their lunch break. So that's why it's really important to make sure you have a process set in place for reasonable suspicion. If you're truly thinking that somebody is in the workplace impaired. Reasonable suspicion information can be found on our website at dfwpa.org under resources, reasonable suspicion, cause guidelines, and sample forms. So under the resource tab and sample forms. And again, you can learn more about reasonable suspicion in our supervisor education. And if you're interested in viewing our entire medical marijuana presentation, you can reach out to Drug Free Workplace PA and we can set you up with that. We do also offer this presentation at least one time a month at Pennsylvania Department of Labor and Industry on their PATHS training calendar. And some resources for you. Again, our webpage, dfwpa.org. We have a ton of resources available there. Pennsylvania drug and alcohol programs. Well, we recognize the use of medical marijuana in Pennsylvania. It's important to note that because somebody does use medical marijuana, that does not mean that that person does have an addiction, but we do like to provide this information to everybody in every presentation. Drug addiction is a huge issue in our country. 1 in 3 families are affected by drug addiction in the United States. And Pennsylvania Department of Drug and Alcohol Programs has a 24/7, 365-day-a-year hotline, a confidential hotline, 1-800-662-4357. And we do encourage anybody that knows of somebody that is struggling, or if you're struggling yourself with an addiction, to reach out to this hotline to find local resources for yourself. Again, it's a confidential hotline that is available. And thank you for joining us today for the medical marijuana presentation. And again, feel free to reach out with questions or for more information.